after our break of Anushka leading a very interesting curated walkthrough of the online exhibition. We would also post, we have all the links on our website. So those of you tuning in, please feel free to go through it and have a look at the website. We would like to thank Premjish Achari, who's joining us along with Anushka here, who would be leading a conversation titled Come Together, Be Together, Work Together, Interrogating Collaborations as a Strategy in Contemporary Art. So if any of you have any questions during the session, please type it into the question and answer box, and we would address them and answer them towards the end of the session. So I would now hand it over to Premjish and Anushka.
Okay. Thank you, Keith. Thank you, Anushka. Also, thanks to Serendipity Arts Foundation. Thanks to Prameya Art Foundation. Thank you for organizing this. And I'm very fascinated by this collaboration, which is a very crucial effort at this time to bring together a diverse range of practitioners and to discuss about not only what is happening right now, but I think it's very important to continue discussion and like not take a backseat right now and not retreat. We have to continue the discussion. We have to deliberate and also may not arrive at a consensus, may not arrive at a conclusion, but it's good to keep this momentum going on. And as Anushka also said rightly, it is an important moment to introspect. And that phrase, that word which you used was very interesting. I think a civilizational, I think it's something like that.
Error.
Yeah, the civilizational error, which like Freud will also call that civilization and its discontents in a way. Very, very, very powerful term. And I think it is a right moment to introspect and reassess the systems which we have built. So today my talk is titled as Come Together, Be Together, Work Together, Interrogating Collaboration as a Strategy in Contemporary Art. And the cover image which I have used is from a movie. If I don't know if you have seen it, it's called Office Space. And Office Space is a very interesting movie. It has its own sort of cult following and everything, where these three techies kind of collaborate, work together. They come together in order to kind of pull out a heist on their own company because they are laid off from their company. It's a very fascinating movie, and I thought of like using this, and I was also confused whether I should use Ocean's 8, which is also a collaborative effort to pull out a heist. But this one is like a direct attack on the contemporary corporate culture. Because in between the protagonist, the main lead of this movie, this character, he goes on to this bohemian kind of face, and which is really appreciated by the superiors. That he is like being creative, he's flexible, he's bohemian and everything. I think which is what the contemporary capitalist working atmosphere favors. And so it's a fascinating movie to watch, and I thought of like sharing this as an image. Why I call collaboration as a strategy, it's also part of my pedagogic teaching exercise, especially when I teach this course called Art After World War II at Shiv Nadar. Contemporary art has been taught, has been written in various ways, as we know. It has been seen as and written as an attitude. It has also been kind of understood as a temporal, stylistic movement. It has been like assessed in various ways. And one of the approaches which I am using is looking at it as various strategies of being. And collaboration is one of the strategies. Curatorial is another strategy. Institutional critique, decolonizations. These are some of the strategies of being in contemporary art. And collaboration, as we know, it has emerged as one of the most established working methods in contemporary art in the recent times. Though it was a marginalized practice in the early days when it began, but since 90s it has picked up. Very interesting. We will also look at what are those factors which kind of favored collaboration as a practice in the mainstream art practice. But I wanted to start with this quote by Hans Ulrich Obrist, who has very interestingly put that collaboration is the answer, but what is the question? And many times I see collaboration being used, overused, and also used very superficially. And I'll come to that too, because as some of you know that I have initiated a curatorial platform called Future Collaborations, which aims for collaborations again. So why I am critical of certain superficial use of collaborations, I'll come to that. And my kind of overview insights are inspired mainly by four scholars, Maria Lind, Suzanne Lacey, Susie Gablick, and Claire Bishop. These are four important figures in art theory and art history for me, from whose writings are also very important for me, who have written extensively in favor of and also critically about collaborative practices and have kind of unpacked what is collaboration in contemporary art. So, what is uh, why collaboration? This is also very important. Why this interrogation and why collaboration as a strategy? And it reminded me of Paul Gilroy's quote when he was addressing a group of young curators. He said that if young curators are to avoid consistent deja vu or Groundhog Day, that's a reference to the movie Groundhog Day, where again the protagonist kind of lives the same day again and again. They need a reopening of questions of race and representation in curatorial practice. And when I started curating, like I had two phases, of curation when I look at my practice. The early phase where I did the same thing which everybody was doing. And then I took a retreat, I backed off, I reassessed my positions. Then I started curating again in 2017, where I desperately wanted to make a paradigm shift or at least make that effort. And it was mainly to kind of avoid this deja vu where exhibitions were becoming a kind of what you call repetitive in a way. The same set of practices, in the sense not art practice, but same set of materializing and realizing an exhibition. That was what going on. That you select a theme, you select a group of artists, you send them a concept note, they will give you something, you put up an exhibition. That was what was going on. It was heavily thematic. It was a thematic selection of artworks, and I wanted to move away from that, break away from that. And when we talk about collaboration, there are different types of collaboration. And as part of future collaborations, there were mainly two types of collaborations which were planned and which were kind of materialized. One was related to a collaboration with the participants, and the second was a collaboration among the participants who were part of this collaborative journey. And when we did our first exhibition in 2017, 16, 17, uh, we did a series of what you call performances, lectures, and there was a lot of coming together, being together, working together in terms of reading, being together, cooking for each other, getting to know each other. So this is what was happening. This what you're seeing is part of that performance art project by, which was initiated by Anupam Saikia, but we were all part of this particular project. And you can also see Khurshid, who collaborated with him, also who was not part of future collaborations at that time, but he just came and he collaborated with him in this project. And this was also the beginning of the pellet injuries in Kashmir when the Kashmiris were shot by pellets. So Anupam recreated pellet injuries on his face, and he traveled in Delhi metro. And Khurshid traveled along with him, and in between he would put this white robe on himself, and he recited Kashmiri poetry, and he kind of consoled and hugged Anupam. And so we were around looking at the reactions, and sometimes it was very hostile. Just an example to show the different kind of things we were doing. Um, and what I felt was there was a lack of sustained discussion on the practice of curation in academic institutions, galleries, and even in informal forums. And this was largely due to how the contemporary art world in India developed. Indian art in the late 1990s and 2000s largely came into limelight because of its commercial nature. I'm talking about the mainstream media and how it represented Indian art. And it mainly represented and wrote about it for its commercial aspects, its investment potentials, the money it was able to rake in. Most writers at this time attributed the genesis of the Indian contemporary art solely to the liberalization of the Indian economy and the subsequent proliferation of private galleries and art foundations. Though we cannot dismiss the role of such institutions, somewhere in this canon making, this drive to arrive at a consensus, several practices and modes of thinking were pushed into the margins. Conventional art history has ignored various critical movements and artist groups that mark the transition of modern art to contemporary art in India. And this is what I think somewhere we have to reassess again, recast again the importance of these groups which were active in every city around India, who had formed discussion groups, were coming together, reading and kind of doing performances in whatever space they were getting. But we ignored all that when we wrote the canon of contemporary art in India. And this foregrounding of the market as the facilitator of art also led to increased commercialization, because of which the members of the art fraternity became extremely competitive, alienated, and lost sight of a community building. And maybe it's provocative, maybe it's accusatory, but I would like to make this argument that it has failed to make a community. It has failed to build a community. So therefore, in 2017, we started Future Collaborations, and we basically wanted to move away from this overused and redundant use of meaningless and unequal partnerships, which was going around as collaboration. And these superficial attempts were not able to cushion the alienation of the practitioner and the commodification of the artwork. A renewed critical way to look at collaboration was required. Exhibition, and also at exhibition, curation, art writing, all of this was required. And this was not possible without putting in a collective effort. So through future collaborations, I was also able to prioritize the coming together, being together and working together of diverse practitioners. Rather than the final exhibition or a product, we gave importance to this journey. And that kind of acted as the fodder, that kind of acted as the intellectual kind of stimulation for this entire process. All the agents who were a part of this future collaboration met regularly, read together, discussed, organized public performances, interventions, lectures, talks, and other activities that may or may not translate into a fixed exhibition in the traditional sense. For me, collaboration is not like a jugalbandi. That is what many has understood collaboration as, where like two distinct practitioners attempt to fuse their art. Rather, it is the coming together of diverse practitioners to interact, to discuss, to aid and enrich and enable each other's practice. This is what I understand. This is what I was trying to foreground. And also, when I talk about collaboration with the audience, this is the second important part, where first, why this collaboration with the audience? Again, there are a lot of interactive participatory practices which are going on. And again, there is a proliferation of such practices, we know that. And what again gets bracketed under the social practices. There's a range of practices which are there. So my attempt was to again develop a critique against these passive and hollow gestures that have become the norm in the name of community-oriented practices. And secondly, also to propose a paradigm shift. Social practices that involve collaboration have received particular attention in contemporary art practice and theory. Though social practice engage with audience and community, they often use the audience or the community to complete the artwork in a predetermined way. And this is one important criticism which the social practice faces, and this has also been raised by Hal Foster too, that it puts also the artwork and the burden on artwork and also on the audience to complete the artwork, which they never asked for. They never wanted to share that burden. You're going there and you're imposing this burden on them. Artists frequently impose their own artistic and political agendas without actually arriving at a shared understanding of such in the process of collaboration. So such attempts have also failed to redefine notions of a socially active, just and equal community. So when I involve the audience or a community, this is again an aspiration. This is what I want to do and I'm attempting to do. First of all, I do not want to speak on behalf of anyone or speak for them or take their speech and then speak for them. The marginalized and the oppressed can speak for themselves. We have to agree on this particular point. I want to develop an equal platform that benefits everyone involved. No one should be a passive, unacknowledged spectator. We all must become active agents who shape positions and formulate collective strategies. This is essential if we are to seriously challenge the power dynamics in our society and transform interpersonal relationships. And central to this task is to reinstate the original function of the curator, which many of us discuss, many of us are kind of doing it in our own practice also, which is the origin of the word curator means curare, which is to take care of or also to heal. And historically, curation was an activity which is limited to the confines of the museums or galleries, where the curator took care of objects in the collection. But and it's only very recently that there has been a shift where curators started taking care of the people, from from objects to subjects. And curators have begun to challenge the dogma and expand the field to heal and take care of communities. So my practice is a part of this change that we are slowly witnessing. And this is where an introductory remark about what I am doing, my interest in collaboration. And this was the first exhibition which we put together as a collaboration called Inquiries on the Contemporary with Aditi, Anupam, Ajay Sharma, Balagopalan, Murari Jha, Vishnu Prasad, Nikita Maheshwari. And I'm thankful to all of them. I hope they are here. So collaboration, as we know, has been also known by various names, as Maria Lynn points out. It's called as artist groups, circles, associations, networks, constellations, partnerships, alliances, coalitions, contexts, teamwork. These are some of the terms and notions that have been buzzing around in the art world for the last 2 decades. And there are few important things when we are when we are collaborating, which we have to remember that what Maria Lynn points out is that what role does artistic agency play in these developments, in these collaborations? To what degree can collaborative practices claim agency through a certain level of capacity in relation to the cult of the individual? And the cult of the individual, as all of you know, is something which was celebrated in modernity, in modernism. This romantic idea of the artist against the society, against the community, alienated and isolated and working alone in the studio, which is also a cultural myth, which was shattered by the feminist art historian and feminists. And when we are using collaboration, is it also leading to certain kind of instrumentalization? What kind of instrumentalization is affecting this mode of cultural production? How collaboration can reproduce capitalist modes of working itself? Something which we have to think about. And finally, how can artistic agency be reformulated under this current neoliberalized working conditions, where these practices, also collaborative strategies, also mimic, and it's vice versa, how they are mimicking each other. And if you have also like friends, and you must be knowing like the way corporate environment functions, like with group discussions, group activities, teams coming together, brainstorming, and also the fascinating tales we hear about Google's working environment, which is like a hippie-like environment where you actually don't work, you just play games, you sleep, you nap, you live a bohemian life. People, we hear that they don't want to go home, they just want to stay in Google Office. So what are these relations? How are they bridged? How are they connected? This is something which is very important for us to discuss. Uh, and as part of this talk, there are certain problems, central problems, which we have to kind of discuss today. And some of them had already been discussed in your session. And I just want to expand on them and also elaborate on them. One important issue which I feel, which is very important, is that the figure of citizen has been eclipsed by that of consumer. This is a significant problem which we are seeing in the contemporary times, that the figure of citizen has been totally overshadowed by that of the consumer, where this consumer figure has become the kind of symptomatic figure of our times. And all the other figures, the refugee, the homeless, the prisoner, the HIV patient, the addict, the squatter, the internally displaced, the racial other, the religious other, the caste other, all has been eclipsed, all have become eclipsed by this consumer figure. And this dominance of this idea of consumer or user in democracy is something which is very scary for me. And I think we have to again kind of interrogate this position. And for this majority, which we have talked about, all these refugees, citizens and all, life has become what Agamben has called as the bare life. That they are left without any power. They are left without any political agency. They are left without any political subjectivity. And when we come back to art, art is a privileged discourse. We have to agree to that. Art is a privileged discourse linked historically to political aggression and also personal arrogance in a way. Very egoistic sort of practice, which is there. So artists who are concerned with the social and political function of art practice, those who wish to ethically engage the complexity of social life, they need to do something different. That we all agree. We all have to do something different. This ethical engagement means both recognizing and also realizing the other subjects, the quote unquote other subjects. This will require artists to rethink their own subject positions, revise their methodologies and also aesthetics, and finally redefine public art practice, and also what is this public in the public art practice. This is again another problem which which is very acute in contemporary art, is this taking for granted the term public without any attempt to define what is this public, as if public is a homogeneous entity, or you are buying into that homogeneous idea of the public. So again, it's a crucial moment to interrogate what is this idea of public in the public art practice. And also in contrast to the shock and estrangement which the avant-garde practiced. The project of ethical resistance or the aesthetics of resistance which we have to build both requires and produces an acceptance of each individual's particular subjective perspective. And it's not an easy task. This is a complicated task. And most of the practices which I am inspired by, they generally have accepted notions of community, and there is what you call it, the heart of these practices. There is an attempt to kind of revive the collective spirit and to kind of make an active intervention in the community with the participation of the community. And also finally, the generally accepted notions of community. This is again another important problem. The way we have understood community has also changed. It has become less socially responsible, less caring, there is less bonding, and to a degree less dissolved. This idea of community has been dissolved over these years. And we are witnessing the kind of the crisis which is going on, the kind of apathy we are maintaining against the victims. It is very evident right now, the way our community has become, what has become right now. Starting with one important practice, an art group from Austria, which is again very influential on my practice and my ideas of collaboration, is Woschenklauser, a group of women artists from Vienna who kind of came together and did this project in Glasgow. So you should look at this interesting project by them, where they went and they identified Glasgow, because Glasgow was experiencing a great level of unemployment at this time historically, and many of the entrepreneurs had left the town, and that means that people who were forced to stay back were the economically poor ones, and also the black communities who had to stay back because they did not have any chance to move on. So Wuschenklauser went there and they realized they had series of interaction with the local community and the women. And they realized that one of the important things which they could do is to generate employment through entrepreneurship and to enable these women. And they worked closely with a group of women, and they developed this project where these women were trained to kind of make these dine out packages, food items, which all because it was also helpful for the working class men and women, because they could just pick these things up for a nominal price and go to their work without getting worried about cooking and all. That saved a lot of time for them. But throughout this process, this group of women were introduced to experts from business, experts from design, and a lot of different fields in order to kind of enable them to start their own venture. And Wuschenklauser facilitated that. And they also mediated a discussion with the owner of this particular business, this particular building, and he kind of waived off the rent for them, I think for 3 months or something like that. So they started this one, and so this is something which is an important project for me in terms of collaboration between artists, between practitioners, but also collaboration between the community. But when we talk about collaboration, the history of cooperation is not new in contemporary. It's not new. People and artists have been collaborating. And we know various examples that from the what you call medieval guilds, from Mughal karkhanas and all, there are many people who are working together. And this is a painting from the group of painters who came together and they were called as Nazarenes. And so Nazarenes were these interesting practitioners who kind of lived and worked in these austere settings in order to kind of revive a spiritual tradition in art. So look at their practice, very interesting. And the second example of a historic cooperation is the Paris Commune, which happened in 1871. And the Paris Commune was in a sense the first large-scale experiment in socialist governance. And as you know, on March 18th of 1871, radical workers and artisans organized the National Guard, which took control of the city as the regular French army fled. And days later, the Commune was elected immediately, declaring that workers could take over and run workshops and businesses, as well as abolishing the death penalty and military conscription, mandating the separation of church and state, and the beginnings of a social safety net and pensions. And both revolutionary and democratic, every day saw new ways of running the city advanced by ordinary laborers. And this include a wholly and radically different way of approaching the realm of art. So on April 15th, the artists, painters, sculptors, and ornamentalists from around Paris, including Gustave Courbet, the well-known painter Eugene Potier, and many of them, who is the author of the lyrics of the International, they gathered to thrash out and propose what this approach might be. And the proposals were very straightforward. that artists control art, and art and culture as a right for everyone. And above all, they questioned why art was almost exclusively to be enjoyed by the state and the well off. It is a right of everybody. And the federation founded by these artists insisted that everyone had the right to live and work amidst beauty. And when we are discussing about problems, Susie Gablik also says that we live so much in an ethos of competitiveness, which keeps us bound to individualistic modes of thought and directed toward the making of products that most of us in the capitalist world have never had an experience of true community. For many people, it's time to move on and revise the cultural myths that are guiding us to reassess our relationship to the present social framework and its practices. So the institutional models based on product development and career achievement echo the stereotypical ideals that have been internalized so much of our culture. Individualism and freedom were the great modernist buzzwords, but they are hardly the most creative response to our planet's immediate needs, which now demand complex and sensitive forms of interaction and linking. And art that is rooted in a listening, and this is what she proposes, that we need a connective aesthetics. And she says that art which is rooted in a listening self rather than in a disembodied I, that from visual to audio, in the sense like from visual to hearing, or from seeing to hearing and listening. So this isolation, it kind of subverts this isolationist thinking, which is kind of dominant in our culture. And it focuses not so much on the individuals, but on the way they interact with each other. That is what she says. So most of the collaborations which we see is basically, it's configured to challenge individualism and also to reconfigure artistic identity, authorship, and sometimes it's also a pragmatic choice in order to share resources, in order to share equipments, and also share experiences. So there's already these things which are happening, and people are collaborating, and there are those are intentional. There are clear intentions behind these collaborations. So this coming together, being together, working together, it also has to be interrogated in the changing understanding of community and also of work. The idea of work is getting changed, and that is what again we are reading a lot in these days, that the idea of work from home, or like flexible working, and also millions of people losing their jobs, and an uncertain future which is going to haunt them, which is going to haunt all of us. The changing nature of work is something which is kind of dominant in our cultural economic imagination. And so this idea of collaboration also has to be interrogated and studied in this context, but also in the context of how communities are changing. Right? The idea of community is also getting revised at this particular time, and it has just always been getting revised. So, but I am not touching upon like various theoretical ideas of how communities are getting kind of redefined. But it will be good if you could read Jean-Luc Nancy's The Inoperative Community, and how he argues that the idea of community has dissolved. Multitude, again, it came up in the last discussion, the notion of multitude as an effective category which replaces the idea of people, and also the idea of population. So, which is mainly proposed by Michael Hart and Antonio Negri. So it is also a very important idea. Compared to the people, multitude is plural and multiple. And it is a set of singularities in which each social subject maintains its difference. So it can be compared with the individual as a part of the people, when the individual must deny his or her difference in order to form a people. And that's the problem, that the individual has to kind of erase their difference, you know, and kind of arrive at a consensus to form, to become the people. And that is where multitude comes in. So unlike the mass or the mob, multitude is not fragmented and disconnected, but consists of active social subjects who can act together. And multitude is a concept that can encompass all important group parameters: class, gender, ethnicity, sexual preference, and everything. So that particular idea of community, which is very important for us to look at. And again, when we look at examples of collaboration outside art, interdisciplinarity is a collaborative effort that way. And where old borders are transgressed, different disciplines come together, meet and work, and at best fertilize each other, enable each other. And this ivory tower has become somewhat lower and even disappeared altogether, for example, because of cultural studies, which is an interdisciplinary um, uh, kind of product, interdisciplinary endeavor, which has made it possible for all of us to kind of engage with popular culture as much as with high literature and art cinemas, but also to see 2012 Marvel's Avengers and everything. It has erased and blurred those kind of hierarchical differences and everything. And also to look at art theory studies of historical paintings, but also look at comic books and all that stuff. And when we also talk about collaboration, most of the collaborative efforts resonate what happened in the social movements of the 90s. So movements such as Reclaim the Streets, which happened in London, and many protest movements of the 90s, and these large-scale protests which happened in the 90s against these big, giant International Monetary Funds, World Economics Forums, G8 meetings, and all that. And also the big protests which happened during the Iraq War, where large number of people protested for US to withdraw from Iraq. And also what we saw recently, the Artists Unite collaboration, where again, people came together, artists came together, and all they collaborated and worked and created a cultural response, a creative response against hatred. And also what we witnessed in the Shaheen Bagh also, where all these young artists and all came together, not only to create paintings, but also create a creative cultural response by also creating reading rooms, creating studios and all, and be there with the community. So a lot of the collaborative practices which we see, it has a desire for activism. And when we talk about the art field today, and ever since these kind of the social movements cropped up in London and different parts of the world in the 90s, they claim a common ownership of the public space. And they do that through these festival-like happenings, which blocked traffic, both individual and collective actions in urban spaces. All of them have similar characteristics. And on-site actions, also against corporate ownerships and all these giants which I talked about earlier, is very important for these kind of collaborations. So this is one example of that, and also various other formations which we know. This one, which is called the open source technology, which was pioneered by Harrison Owen in 1980. Open source technology is again a flexible conference. So you just say that there is a conference. You do not tell, you do not announce what kind of themes and topics will be discussed. So as you will go there and you register your name, you share your expertise and what you would like to speak and what you would also like to listen. And based on that, there will be a consensus, and then the speakers will speak based on the demand of the kind of crowd which has come there. And it will go on like that. So it's a democratic platform, but it's also very chaotic platform that way. You do not know what is going to happen. And at the end of these sessions, a feedback is taken from all the participants, and then it kind of goes into the learning exercise of how to do it better every time. So why I'm showing you all these examples is because art and the way art functions and art processes functions, it is part of the same socio-economic culture. It is not separate from that. And its participation in the production and the reproduction of the working conditions of that particular mode of production has to be taken seriously. We cannot have this kind of naive romantic idea that art is separate and art creation is something totally separate from the world. And and one example which I gave which I talked about in my synopsis is also that these ideas of collaboration, flexibility, creativity, and this bohemian figure has been embraced by capitalist modes of working itself. So in that context, there is no difference between the collaboration which you are doing and the capitalist way of working. So this is where we have to seriously think about how should we collaborate now. And but also when capitalism favors flexibility, creativity, and this bohemian figure of the artist, it is in contrast to these ideal romantic artists, because you must be able to alternate between working on your own, being self-motivating, being part of a group, working in a team. But the artistic organization, it allows for a certain kind of self-organization. It allows self-empowerment. And the latter which I talked about, the working model, the capitalist working model, is more instrumental. It is more about profit making. Whereas these other collaborations are not about that. So when we look at collaborative practices, we have to look at, is collaboration gathering individuals in a unique way, apart from the way offered by mass culture and contemporary capitalist culture? And has it been able to create new situations, micro utopias? And most importantly, it uses human relations as raw materials. So this is something we have to look at when we talk about what you call collaboration in art practice itself. Some of the classic examples of collaboration in the way collaboration is understood as a jugalbandi or a partnership is these kind of collaborations also, where these two Russian artists came together and worked on a series of painting, Vitaly Komer and Alexander Melamed. They kind of created this pastiche of Soviet realist paintings. And it was a critique of the imposed Soviet realism on artists, but also the slow transition which Russia was witnessing after the 80s and all. So these are some of their paintings. Go and take a look at their paintings. And also, if you don't know, this collaboration between Andy Warhol and Michael Basquiat is another example to look at. And then again, some of the people, contemporary people who are working on collaboration. One of them is, again, Dominic Gonzalez Forrester, who collaborates on everything from the writing of science fiction novel with fellow artist Philippe Parino to working with rock singer Alain Bashung on set design. So there is collaboration on everything, but we don't know exactly why she's collaborating. That is never stated. And so this is a statement. My approach to art is quite radical. It has more to do with theater and staging than making objects such as paintings or sculptures. Sometimes I think that the fetishism of objects is pathetic. It's one way to deal with art. I'm obsessed with other things. She also hopes that her installations will encourage people to interact with them. I want to coax people to engage with my art in the same way that a writer might entice people to read a book. So this is an example of our collaboration. Take a look at that. But I want to all of you to look at this particular group, which is very interesting and important for me, is the group material. And they were active from the 1980s onward because, as you know, the AIDS crisis, the AIDS epidemic, like right now, like we have this COVID pandemic, the AIDS epidemic was a significant crisis, a tragic crisis of the 80s, where thousands of AIDS patients were left abandoned without any treatment, and most of them were from the queer community. And there was no support system for them from the government, and there was no community for them to come together. So group material, which mainly functioned in New York from 1989 to 1996. And you know these artists, like these are like very important figures of contemporary art. All of them were members of that particular group. And they did this very interesting AIDS timeline project and also another collaborative project called Democracy. I'll show you both projects. So this is the group materials, Democracy, Education. And while we are talking about, it's a 4-part exhibition. And the context of this exhibition is the 1980s, where American democracy was going through a crisis. And the crisis resonated and permeated into every institution, especially into the education sector too, where the education sector itself, in its pedagogy and also in its accessibility, neglected the minority, the low-income children. And in the 1988 presidential election, it became a kind of open, what you call, spectacularization of politics. And so this particular project was a critique of all of this, and also the government's neglect to look at the AIDS epidemic. But when you look at this particular exhibition, just look at it visually, you will see that they are following a classroom setting and also a salon setting. It looks like the European salons, which used to happen in the 19th century. And each installation has multiple viewpoints. There are different styles and methods which are incorporated in this. And all of them are not done by artists. There are also AIDS activists, teachers, who are working as collaborators in this particular project. So the idea is to make this exhibition an educational exhibition, but also a democratic sphere, an agonistic sphere where different ideas are coming together. And they are in tension with each other. They are in an agonistic relationship with each other, which is proposed by the political theorist Chantal Mouffe. So this is what collaborations should be also. It should not be about, it should not be like a forced marriage, okay, let's come together. Or it should not be like a blind date. It's becoming, there's too much of commonality which is going on right now. There's too much of prescription which is going on right now. And in Mauve's way, what we need is not a consensus right now, but we need to clearly establish differences and say that, okay, this is what I believe in, this is what I believe in, as adversaries, not as enemies. There is a difference between collaborating as adversary, and enemies will never anyway collaborate, but it is important to be adversaries to each other. Because with adversaries, what happens is that you share a common ground, and but you disagree with them on the meanings and implementations of basic principles of this common ground. And these disagreements cannot be resolved through deliberation and rational discussion and all, like which the consensus political parties talk about, that everything can be resolved. It is not easy. That is why the right wing also hates democracy, because they believe that democracy will never arrive at a conclusion. And that is exactly the point of democracy, to not arrive at a conclusion, but to give everybody a chance to speak. And collaborations should be about that. Collaborations should not be easy. It should not be about coming together and creating these easy works. So some of the examples from this exhibition, as you can see, the various models of exhibition, various works which are incorporated into this. And another important work which they did was the AIDS timeline, which is again a very important work in terms of the 1980s politics. And this particular exhibition kind of helped them to form a public opinion and a public support for the AIDS victims. And in 1989, Ronald Reagan, who was the president of US at that time, he gave his first public speech on AIDS epidemic. Till then, it was never addressed officially. There were no funds directed by the government institutions. They were left to fend off their own. So the AIDS timeline, which you see, it reconstructs the history of AIDS in the web of culture and political relations. And again, there is a diversity of materials. They are not using historical materials or artworks as such. They are making this timeline by bringing together materials from popular culture and mass media. That's what they are doing, and also reports by activists, and also different sort of materials which are there, which are brought together. So another important work, but I want to quickly point out a response by Tim Rollins, who was part of this particular group and has led many interesting collaborations. So he said in this particular essay that this was work that actually transformed the situation. That was the impetus for the work. This was political art that was not about politics, not about representation or reportage, but about dialogue and made in concert with the community. And Tim Rollins is again an important figure. We will come to him quickly. But another important group was Grand Fury. It was again an AIDS activist artist collective, which again functioned during the same time. And very interestingly, they used what you call campaigns as an effective strategy by coming together. And these are some of their works. You can see that. And they kind of used and appropriated a commercial language, which was part of the American kind of advertisement culture and all of that particular time. So they appropriated that. And this was the kind of signature feature of all the artists who were involved in that particular group. And so as you can see, like all this had a campaign-like approach to it. I just want you to read the quote. But one important thing, again, like I'll conclude it in another 5 minutes, but Edith Rogoff, the curator and theorist, has stated this, that this concept of collaboration is exceedingly limited for her. She says that it assumes a coming together of talents and skills, which cross-fertilize one another through simple processes, neither challenged by issues of difference nor by issues of resistance. This is what I said earlier, that collaboration should not be easy. And that is why we need an agonistic politics. And another important collaboration which you could look at is by Tim Rollins and KOS, Kids of Survival, where Tim Rollins collaborated with the school students where he was teaching, and these are the students from the Black community, and who are, so he mainly collaborated with the disenfranchised, the students from the disenfranchised background, and he developed a collaborative method which helped them to learn, read, write, and along with that, also create artworks. And it is a collaboration which continued till Tim Rollins died. Till, as you can see, they're growing up now, like different stages of their life. Sorry for this. Yeah, and then these are the, what you call the typical participatory examples by Rirkett and all, which is there. So when we look at collaboration, there are 4 types of collaboration, 4 distinct methods of collaboration which are used. One is working with others. The second is interactive activities. The third is collective action. And then the fourth is participatory practice. These are the 4 types of collaborations which are there. And working with others is, again, a very famous, very widely used method in collaborative practices. And interactive activities is also another example of that, where again, you create a work of art which just interacts. It permits one or more reactions that can influence the appearance of the work, that's it. And collective action is again a method where it is instead that a group of people formulate an idea and then carry it out together. Guerrilla Girls is an example of this collective action. And participatory, there are different difference between producer and receiver in participatory practices. The focus is on the receiver, the latter, the receiver. And the significant part of the development of the work is transformed to the receiver. And they kind of complete the work. And Rirkett, Adrian Piper, and all are the best examples of these kind of practices. This is again another important work, the Gramsci Monument by Thomas Hirschhorn, which is again a collaborative practice, but it is different from the usual collaborative practice because Thomas Hirschhorn does not acknowledge the people who created this with him. He instead pays them off for their labor. And he remains the sole creator. His name comes, we do not hear the collaborator's name in this. But it's again an example of an interactive work. Um, these are again some of the examples which you could look at. Um, Trade bartering, weapon production. This is the Open Public Library by Michael Clegg and Martin Gutman, where they establish this public libraries in the community and where they collected books door to door. And people could borrow books and then also keep books and return them. So it's maintained through a collective responsibility. Susan Lacy, who I said that is an important figure in this particular context, and her work, The Crystal Quilt, is very important in this particular context, where she invited more than 430 women, and they all of them came and wore this black dress, and they came together and discussed their anxieties, their fears on Mother's Day. And so it kind of, again, connecting it with the idea of connective aesthetics to kind of listen and share rather than creating something visual. Prisoners is a work which all of you should look at by Jonathan Borowski and Gary Glassman, where they interviewed a group of prisoners. And in US context, and all of you know that the prison industrial complex is a huge problem there, which is kind of written a lot by Angela Davis, that how the Black community is always, or they occupy the US prisons a lot in order to kind of churn out the profit for the prison industrial complex too. So look at this particular work. And also Merle Lederman Ukele's touch sanitation performance, where she, I think she interacted with more than 800, or I don't know the exact number, but it's a huge number of sanitation workers in New York. She went and met them personally and told them that, told them thank you for making NYC alive. And again, as you know, in the Indian context and also in the US context, most of these sanitation workers are blacks, and in the Indian context, they are the Dalits. And they are again the marginalized communities who does this sort of work. So through this project, she was able to highlight their issues. But I again feel that it is not what we call, it is a very convenient reconciliation, where you go, where you meet them, you shake their hand and say thank you, and as if the entire problem is solved. But it kind of helped to bring their plight and their this particular group of figures into attention. Again, some more examples. Super Channel is again an example which all of you could look at. So, as I said earlier, some of these projects give these unsolicited services which the audience have never asked for. And this is where, again, I say that a radical art for me, a collaboration is for me, where the collaborators create a platform for the oppressors to speak and not speak on their behalf. That is what a radical practice has to do. And when we look at collaborations, we have to look at that. Does it make any difference if diverse forms of artistic collaboration lie behind an artwork or any other kind of cultural production? Is collaboration inherently a better method which produces better results? This is something we all have to think about. And but what collaboration does is also very interesting, because it does something which otherwise would not have taken place, which we are usually not allowed to do. And it simply has to make possible that which otherwise is impossible. That is what the beauty of collaborations are also. And to just end today by quoting again Susie Gablick and her idea of connective aesthetics, it's important to see our interdependence and interconnectedness. This is the feminist perspective and the feminine perspective that she kind of talks about. This interdependence and this interconnectedness is what is missing from not only from art, but also from the scientific thinking, policy making, aesthetic philosophy, and which is being based on traditions of separation and heroic independence. That is what the cultural myth of aesthetic philosophy is, that you have to be isolated and you have to be a male romantic or in the masculine romantic antisocial artist. So we have to move away from that. So in which the artists or the artistic community or the individual, they kind of view the other people and the world as alien forces. And that's what you're fighting against. There is this, what you call antagonistic relationship with the society. And you are the isolated individual who is antisocial individual who is fighting against all this. So the politics of connective aesthetics is very different. It is oriented toward the achievement of shared understandings and the essential intertwining of self and other, self and society. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Premjish, for bringing together all these different ideas around collaboration and talking about it so in depth, because I feel like in our context, we don't talk about collaboration enough. We are short on time. And I mean, this, as you know, this is in close conversation with my research as well. So there are lots of notes, many questions, but I'll narrow it down to two, and I'll ask them together so that you can, prioritize as you feel is relevant. So one is, you briefly referred to authorship, but when we talk about art practice in relation to a capitalist market system, authorship is one of the primary defining aspects around it, right? So how do you see, without authorship, even within collaborative practices, what is your position around authorship and its relationship with capital and the market, especially in a context where there isn't that much guaranteed sustainability for collaborative practices, with little patronage, almost no philanthropy, no state support, few institutions. So how do you locate this in our current context? That's one question, and which would be helpful for all of us as practitioners to think about. Another thing that was interesting was, you referred to the idea of passive and hollow gestures, which recall Grant Kester's idea of aesthetic evangelism in participatory art, and critique of it when the artist is kind of determining the structure and its participants are quite incidental, and it's an ephemeral community that evolves and then dissipates around the context of the work, and also the extent to which that can possibly only be answered by the possibility of a self-determined community, and how that can actualize itself within the arts, because the moment it's a self-determined, for instance, Mirel Latimer and Ukil also said that after the revolution, who will take the trash out on Monday morning? So when that is possible only within a self-determined community, right? So these are some of my concerns, and I wondered how you felt about it.
Yeah, I may not be able to answer all because I'm also in search of answer, but just to kind of expand what you said in the end, it's also like what Zizek also says, like, I'm not interested in these huge gatherings at the Times Square or all this Tiananmen Square and all these places where people come together to protest and all. He says that I'm more interested in what happens after the revolution, the next day after the revolution. That is where the interesting decisions and important decisions are taken, where people come together and ideas of self-organization germinate in order to run a community, in order to form a community, in order to arrive at a community. And that's where Paris Commune is very important for me in that regard, because they seriously came together and thought about and planned every aspect of running a society. So that is one thing which I want to begin with. Authorship is a very important problem. There are various aspects to it. One is the commodified nature of authorship, how it is celebrated. That has to be problematized, and I believe that collaboration does that. But in collaboration, again, the important criticism which collaboration has raised, that in this attempt to collaborate and erase authorship, certain labors and certain contributions are left unacknowledged. So again, within collaboration, there is this unequal partnerships, unequal contributions which kind of emerge. It's a very simple example, like the team assignments which we used to get in school, and some student will do it and we all get the credit, right? So like that, in the sense, like, so in collaboration also it happens. We have to acknowledge that, like, everybody may not work, everybody may not contribute equally, but in this attempt to kind of erase authorship, and it's a capitalist idea of authorship. It's which is rooted in the celebration of individual, which is rooted in the celebration of what you call this isolatory antisocial life, and which Susie Gabley calls as a cultural myth, and we have to come out of that. So that is where I feel that this is an important challenge which all of us have to take. And I do not have a clear answer to this, because I'm also in search of this. I'm also interrogating this. And that's why I also want to open up this as a discussion for all of us to kind of engage with it. But I want everybody to engage with it, at least think about this, and kind of dispel these cultural myths which dominate art history, art practice. And that is where I think these practices are very important. And I think somebody called Vijay has asked this question, that how is that Buscher Clauser's project, can it be called as art? It cannot be called as art. And maybe it can be called as art, because art is also not a stable term. What qualifies as art and what does not qualify as art is not a stable, there's no stable definition for it. Historically, what has been understood as art has always changed in time.
Yeah, I would like to, sorry to interrupt, but then I would say that it's more than it not being stable. There's also a validatory system that is in place that recognizes certain practices as art and certain practices as not art. Because when I started my research work, one of the things that I realized is that there are lots of projects that we in the art world, quote unquote art world, would identify as an artwork, but then the orchestrators of these collaborations and these projects themselves may not necessarily want to identify with the art world, which creates an altogether different category. Yeah, so it's not so much about what is art, it's also about what would we claim as art, but whereas it probably doesn't want that kind of claim to the claim.
Yeah, true. And again, another important criticism which comes out of this context is that, which Claire Bishop, like, she is very critical of these practices. And she says that and also my students also ask, sir, ये तो government भी कर सकती है, this kind of things. So what is the difference between a government project and an art project like this? So, and this has also been used by the Labour Party also very effectively in order to conceal certain issues and also withdraw from their responsibility. That is, NGOs will do this, that also museum staff does not have to be paid. Let's look for collaborative efforts where community will come together and they will take care of the museum, or they will take care of things and all. So it gives a kind of, first of all, this is a problem. It gives the government and also politics a space to move away from certain key areas. But also, while these practices replicate a policy making, a certain sort of activism in it, Claire Bishop's argument is that how do we assess this? Do we only get to assess it through the category of ethics? What about aesthetics? What is aesthetics in that project, Rushin Clausen's project? So aesthetics take a back seat in this particular project. And that is why for her, Thomas Hirschhorn's project is very important, because it may not be ethical in the way he handled the workers and the collaborators, but there is an aesthetics of resistance which he's trying to produce. So I think we should also open this up to these kind of discussions, and that is very important for me. And I think Vijay has also asked about the 4 writers which I've been inspired by. One is Maria Lind, Susan Lacy, Lacy, Susie Gablick, and Claire Bishop. These are the 4 writers which I've said. Anything else?
There's another question which is quite interesting. What definition of an artwork is this moving towards?
Yeah, that's what I said. That's what I said. And more than that, for me, what definition of work is this? Yeah. What is work? And this is, again, we have something to reassess, because work for a long time, work has been associated with reward. And this reward mechanism is something which is dominant in contemporary, in capitalist economics and all that. And a lot of efforts which comes from the collaborative side, and also this all these what you call this open source technologies and these free software and all these things which is operating against and parallel to the capitalist market and all, they function together without what you call this reward as an imperative factor in their modes of working. But also we have to look at platforms like couch surfing and things like that. How does those things function? All of them involves labor, but they are reconfiguring labor and work into a different understanding of work and labor. And I think that is where I think art is also moving. And I think through these processes, art is also trying to challenge the very idea of art, work itself.
Another interesting idea is that within a capitalist structure, community is a statistical quantity. It's a quantitative category, which translates to data. And so it's not just necessarily capitalism, but it's also a certain kind of empiricism that is not inwardly critical, but is only outwardly critical. Yeah. That one needs to rethink through aesthetics, because even the possibility of aesthetics is that it's always in a way qualitative, not to reinforce hierarchical notions of what aesthetics is, but it's a qualitative notion. So in that sense, there's an interesting kind of almost fictional relationship between the understanding of community itself in these two systems.
Yeah, true, very true. Arnika has also asked a question. She writes, "Hi, you two. Thanks so much for this session. I just wanted to share a thought on collaboration in India, where artists have often collaborated with communities. In most of these cases, the artist collaborates with social/economic inferiors. The idea of collaboration then becomes unidirectional. The artist is doing something for someone, at the same time appropriating their knowledge, energy, authenticity to give their work a social value. The community becomes a source for the artist to produce." That's very important observation. And that's what I was also saying, that human resources or human relations is used as the raw material for these kind of collaborations. And most of them feed on these kind of unequal relations and these kind of hierarchical relations where you go with a particular agenda, not even initiate a discussion, and you kind of assume that the community needs these things. And that is where I always discourage these practices. And I believe that go there and initiate a communication, at equal communication, and not understand the community, but understand if they need what you are trying to propose. Or then move away, back away from there, or otherwise develop something which the community needs, requires, in collaboration and in partnership with them. I think that would be ideal. That is an ideal collaboration for me. But yes, totally agree. That is the kind of social practice which we witness in India a lot, where again, there is no idea of caste hierarchies, social hierarchies, economic inequalities, and all that. You just go there and also impose certain sort of contemporary forms, which again, the people have no awareness about, no idea about these practices.
Yeah. And it's also interesting how you mentioned earlier that the marginalized, I'm paraphrasing, of course, badly paraphrasing, but how the marginalized do not need to be spoken for, they can speak for themselves. And that is that's a fundamental aspect of understanding collaboration in a particular manner in which you have described. And again, falls back to aesthetic evangelism and the necessity for communities to be self-determined rather than. So I feel that when you go from a position of privilege to a community and working with them, in a way, it could also be to look at it positively. It's also a way of moving away from the idea of mass address, which reinforces the logic of nationalisms, in a way towards community address. But a way to do it would be to use privilege to give space rather than speak for.
Yes. I totally agree with that. And that's what I think we have to do, that we have to create these platforms. And in collaboration with the community, which they can use to speak for themselves. And we do not have to kind of, in the sense like, we have to facilitate. Again, in our own, in the way we speak, in the way we write, we have to move away from certain terms that we are providing. We have to move away from this kind of what you call patriarchal and patronizing gestures and language. I think the changes in language itself will bring in a lot of change in the attitude in collaborative and social practice itself and all. Absolutely. Because many times, like what we see again is that we are doing a big favor for these communities, these inferior communities, is what we kind of like think about ourselves, what we kind of project ourselves, that is what we do. And we have to move away from this. They never ask for your help. They never ask for your kind of your what you call your privileges, your knowledge. So this is something the Indian art world also has to seriously interrogate. And also they have to seriously interrogate about the meaningless collaborative practices and also meaningless participatory endeavors which they are engaging in. And this is a strong critique I have against the Indian art world also. It is very meaningless. And I think we have to, as I said, we have to rethink our positions very clearly. And the time has come finally. We have to do that. And we have to again do that together. And I think these discussions we have to continue in this platform or somewhere else. This should be an ongoing discussion. And like the early Frankfurt School, now the liberal right-wing turn Jürgen Habermas criticizes critical thinking that it only poses problems. It doesn't offer any solutions. So we need communicative theory, but no, we need questions. We need more questions because first of all, we are not allowed to ask questions anymore. Everybody needs answers. Everybody needs solutions. But no, we cannot afford to continue the way we are going. And this pandemic has proven that we cannot afford. Okay, so yeah, let's end now.
Yeah.
And yeah,
I think that's a good note to end on.
okay.
Thank you so much, Premjish and Anushka. We would definitely need more sessions to continue the discussion. I'm sorry we're running late on our schedule. I would like to thank our audience also who took out time to tune in. We have wonderful programming for the days ahead. You can find more information on our website and our social media. Thank you once again, Premjish and Anushka. I hope you had a good time. And I'm really sorry for any technical glitches if you were.
No, there was nothing. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a great week.
You too. All the best.